Stalking the halls of her terrifying monastery, Mariam Suliakiotis became known as the Rasputin nun, thanks mainly in part to how many victims she left in her wake. Today we look at 50 of the most dangerous serial killers to have ever walked the earth, including Britain's Harold Shipman and William Unek, a man so dangerous the King's African Rifles were employed to hunt him down in the British Congo. Welcome everybody to the top 50 most dangerous serial killers in the world. If you're enjoying the long form content, then please don't forget to smash the like button, as it will help other people find the video. Hit the subscribe button with the bell icon to make sure you're notified of new videos coming every single week, and make sure you leave a comment down below and let me know what your thoughts are on the world's most dangerous serial killers. I hope you enjoy the video. Number 50, Moses Sithole. Spending most of his early life in an orphanage, Sithole was abandoned by his mother and father, who died at an early age. He was arrested for attacking several women in his early teens and later blamed imprisonment for many of his future crimes. Appearing to be a mild-mannered individual to those around him, Sithole had a dark side, and by 1995 he had claimed over 30 victims, sparking nationwide panic in South Africa. At one point, President Nelson Mandela visited Boksburg prison in person to appeal for public assistance in apprehending the killer, who at the time was unknown. He would target mainly black women between the ages of 19 and 45 years old, and most of his victims were originally interviewed for positions within his own company. Sithole is now known to have murdered at least 37 women and one toddler between the 16th of July 1994 and the 6th of November 1995. Number 49, Virarenzi. Born in Bucharest sometime in 1903, her mother died when she was 13, and she moved with her father to Serbia. She had become increasingly unmanageable and had frequently run away from home by the age of 15, with numerous boyfriends all older than her. Having an almost pathological desire for constant male companionship, she developed a highly jealous and suspicious nature. Her first husband was poisoned in a jealous rage, and Renzi later told friends and family he had died in a car accident. She remarried, but her second husband also disappeared, seemingly without trace, with Renzi telling friends and family he had abandoned her. Over the next few years, numerous affairs were carried out, with many married men disappearing and police investigations ensuing. When they searched Renzi's mansion, the horrors of her crimes finally came to light, with police finding 35 zinc-lined coffins, all within their own space, being behind a locked door in the basement. After opening them, Renzi confessed to the poisonings, saying she believed the men had been unfaithful to her. She was sentenced to death for the 35 murders, but was spared as Yugoslavia did not execute women at the time, and instead went mad in prison, screaming at the hallucinations of her own victims. She is thought to be one of the first women to have earned the nickname Black Widow. Number 48, Raman Raghav. Active during the mid-1960s and labelled by many as Jack the Ripper of India, Raman Raghav went on a killing spree for over 3 years, with the first round of murders taking place in 1965 and 1966. 19 people were attacked in the first round of killings, and after his second round of attacks he is thought to have killed over 41 people. After his arrest in 1966, Raghav confessed to all the murders, with all of the victims being pavement and slum dwellers who were attacked with blunt objects at night. A series of other murders in Mumbai, where 9 people were killed, bear a striking resemblance to Raghav's methods. However, it is still unknown if he was involved. He died in prison, but to this day it's thought tens, maybe hundreds more may have been killed by Raghav. Number 47, John Wayne Gacy. Having a difficult relationship with his father while growing up, he was regularly attacked, beaten and belittled by him over a number of years. He lived a relatively normal life until the age of 18, working in politics, travelling to Las Vegas and working as a salesman. After a successful career working for KFC, he began to get involved with wife swapping, prostitution, pornography and drug use. He was first convicted of assaulting 15-year-old Donald Verhoeves Jr. in 1967 1967, was later convicted of witness intimidation in 1968, and was later diagnosed with antisocial personality disorders. He was jailed for the 1968 attack, but while in prison obtained his diploma in November 1969. After prison, Gacy was thought to have led a completely normal life, even meeting First Lady Rosalynn Carter on May 6, 1978. Without going into details, as the crimes are far too horrific, Gacy murdered 36 young men after luring them to his house. 26 were found buried in crawl spaces within his home, and the rest were found in the garden. It is reported that Gacy, often dressed as a clown while committing the murders, taunted the victims while not revealing his true identity. He is remembered as one of Chicago's most brutal serial killers. Number 46, Karl Denke. Often described as a quiet and soft-spoken child who was difficult to raise, Denke, for whatever reason, began killing homeless vagrants and poor travellers in 1903. He murdered again in 1909 with a ledger of his victims later found that revealed not only cannibalistic tendencies, but also that Denke had been responsible for some 42+ deaths. He was arrested after trying to attack a homeless drifter named Vincenz Oliver, who managed to wrestle an axe from Denke as he swung it wildly at the visitor whom he had invited into his home. Denke was arrested, but before he could be questioned, committed suicide in his cell. The exact number of victims is currently unknown, however the gruesome findings from his home had already revealed the evil at its core. Number 45, Francisco Brito. Sentenced to more than 581 years in prison, Brito is still alive to this day and is a former prospector and self-employed mechanic. Responsible for several homicides against children in Brazil, several bodies were located inside his residence. He later confessed to the murders of 17 people, mostly under the age of 15, and later investigations revealed that the murder total is more like 42. Having revealed his clear psychopathic characteristics after arrest, he will now die in prison, but the murders created terror, and it will live in infamy across Brazil. Number 44, the Monster of the Mangones. One of the only people on this list to have never been identified, this Colombian serial killer is said to have murdered between 30 and 38 teenage boys, mainly targeting those wandering through vacant lots. It was the most notorious criminal case in the country's history, and between 1960 and 1970, it is believed that he used syringes to draw blood from his victims. Said to possibly suffer from clinical vampirism, the killer was described as a true sexual sadist, was never captured, and remains unknown to this day. Number 43, Milton Sipalo. Known as the Lukaska Strangler, this Zambian serial killer and rapist managed to murder 29 women and girls between January and September 1980. To this day, Sipalo is credited with being one of the most active serial killers of all time, murdering at least one victim every week. He often lured his victims to public areas, typically bus terminals and railway stations, and then left victims in open spaces. The locations proved to be his downfall, as one night a surviving victim recognised him, alerted police, and he was arrested. He managed to escape police custody while being transferred to interrogation, fled to the roof of a nearby building, and jumped, killing himself. Number 42, David Simelane. First sentenced to 6 years imprisonment for robbing and raping a woman, he was released in 1998 and immediately embarked on his killing spree. Often stealing his victims' money and valuables to participate in gambling, Simelane would commit most of his killings in local forests. He was arrested in 2001 and more than 45 bodies have now been discovered, with a conviction in at least 28 murders. Now sentenced to death in Swaziland, he has appealed many times and, as far as I can tell, is still in prison somewhere and very much alive. Number 41, Cedric McKee. Known as the Wemmer Pan Killer, McKee was based in South Africa, and his killing spree began in April 1996 and targeted victims of the Wemmer Pan area of Johannesburg. Throughout 1996 and 1997, he committed at least 27 murders, with him being suspected of many more. McKee was sentenced to 27 life sentences plus 1,159 years and 3 months imprisonment on September 6, 2000, with his total sentence amounting to 1,340 years in prison. Number 40, the Volga Maniac. Between 2011 and 2012, a series of murders against elderly women in and around the region of Tartazan gripped Russia. The first 9 murders took place in Kazan, while others were reported in Samara and Nizhny Novgorod, among others. The alleged perpetrator was captured on the CCTV cameras at the entrance to one of his victims' homes in 2016. A reward of 1 million rubles was promised in return for information beneficial to the investigation after it was reported that the killer was somewhere in the Sakhalin Oblast. Rajid Tagirov, a plumber and locksmith, was finally arrested for the murders in 2020 and charged with murdering 32 people. More than 10,000 comparative genetic studies in criminal databases were used to try and catch him over the 2-year killing spree. Number 39, The Stone Man. In one of the few serial killing episodes to have never been solved, the first murders took place in Mumbai between 1985 and 1988. A second spree similar to the first took place in Calcutta with 13 sleeping homeless victims reported. Several similar incidents were reported in Guwahati city of Assam state during February 2009, and several people were arrested, questioned and released without charge. No one has ever been caught for the crimes, and several movies have loosely covered events surrounding the killings, but have been deemed non-factual thanks to their endings. The Stone Man is thought to have been responsible for as many as 26 murders in total. Number 38, Anders Breivik. Currently imprisoned at Skien prison in Norway, Breivik has been held in solitary confinement since 2013 due to him being extremely dangerous. Breivik is one of, if not the most dangerous terrorist Norway has ever known, after he exploded a bomb at the Norwegian Parliament building, killing 8, before travelling to the island of Utøya and killing over 69 people and injuring 319. Openly admitting to be a far-right Nazi, Breivik has given several Nazi salutes in court on multiple occasions and has stated his clear opposition to Islam. He planned the attacks with great care and attention, even going as far as to obtain a fake police ID. Breivik was sentenced to preventative detention for a period of 21 years, currently the maximum allowed under Norwegian law, and, incredibly, has already been in front of the parole board once. Breivik also claims to be part of a number of religious and political groups, including the Knights Templar, Progress Party, English Defence League, and the Freemasons. Number 37, Peter Sutcliffe. Considered to be one of the worst serial killers in British history, Peter Sutcliffe is known by his far more chilling name as the Yorkshire Ripper. Sutcliffe targeted young women and girls in his initial attacks, but later moved on to prostitutes in various red light districts due to their increased vulnerability. By the time his killing spree was complete, over 13 people were murdered and another 11 had been attacked and survived their ordeal. The attacks and murders took place between 1975 and 1980, covering a total of 7 different locations that included Leeds, Bradford, Manchester, Huddersfield, just to name a few. He was arrested for driving a car on false plates and at the time had another potential victim with him in the car. After police discovered weapons at the location of the arrest and at the police station where he'd been taken, he was charged with the Ripper murders. Initially starting his prison term at Parkhurst after conviction, he was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia and was sent to Broadmoor Hospital after he was attacked. Returned to HMP Franklin following treatment for a suspected heart attack, he suffered a second heart attack at University Hospital of North Durham and died at the age of 74, November 13th, 2020, while serving a whole life term. Number 36. Jack the Ripper. Famed as one of the most prolific serial killers to have ever been caught in Britain, Jack the Ripper's murder spree terrorised the residents of Whitechapel, London in 1888. Similar to the Yorkshire Ripper killings, prostitutes were the main target of the London Ripper. However, the attacks from earlier Ripper were much more frenzied. The killer often removed the internal organs of his victims, and this led to police believing that he had some sort of surgical knowledge. The number of victims is to this day unknown, however 5 have been reported and as many as 11 may have been killed in total. While the Ripper was never caught, at least intentionally, the murders stopped suddenly, and this is thought to be attributed either to a death of the murderer, capture for another crime, or immigration. Today the identity of the Ripper is still unknown, but features in hundreds of works of fiction including the Ripper Letters and a hoax diary. Jack the Ripper was voted as the worst Briton in history thanks to a BBC History magazine poll in 2006. Number 35, Adolf Seafelt. Known as the Sandman, Adolf Gustav Seafelt was born March 6, 1870 in Potsdam in the Northern German Confederation. Active during the reign of the Third Reich, he is thought to have killed over 12 boys, having been abused by 2 older men when he was younger. He spent much of his life in and out of prison and mainly targeted his victims in pine preservations. He is believed to have used his own homemade poison, a version of chloroform, to commit the killings, often putting his victims into a hypnotic sleep. Many later died from hypothermia, having been left in the woods without being reawoken. Records of Seafelt's conviction are poor, however it appears he was sentenced to death on February 29, 1936, and was beheaded by the guillotine soon after. Number 34, Lonnie Franklin Jr. Better known by the nickname the Grim Sleeper, Franklin Jr. was responsible for at least 10 murders and one attempted murder in Los Angeles, California. He was active alongside several other serial killers, including Michael Hughes and Louis Crane. He took a 14-year break from his crimes from 1988 to 2002, and this earned him the nickname, while also having prior convictions for rape. He was convicted of the full 10 murders and sentenced to death. However, he was found dead in his cell before the execution could be carried out, and the results of the autopsy have not been publicly released. Number 33, Louis Van Schuer. Known as the apartheid killer, Schuer was active in South Africa between 1986 and 1989, and he is thought to have confessed to the killing of upwards of 100 people. Between 9 and 39 victims are officially confirmed, and the former policeman and security guard was convicted of 7 murders and 2 assassinations. His criminal penalty was 20 years imprisonment, and today, while I can't find out much information, his status is listed as released. Currently thought to be around 71 years old if still alive, both his status and location are currently unknown. However, he was involved in the farming business as late as 2020. Van Schuer is listed as South Africa's worst serial killer. Number 32, Rodney Alcala. Rodney James Alcala was another American serial killer active within various states between 1977 and 1979. Convicted of killing 5 people in California, he is also convicted of 2 homicides committed in New York in 1971 and 1977. Alcala's true number of victims remains unknown, and authorities believe the actual number is as high as 130. Other charges on his rap sheet include battery, kidnapping, violation of probation, 2 counts of rape, and 1 count of providing cannabis to a minor. He is often referred to as the dating game killer because of his 1978 appearance on the television show The Dating Game. Sentenced to death, he never made it to the execution chamber, instead dying of natural causes on July 24, 2021, at the age of 77 while on death row. Number 31, Sidney Cook. Serving 2 life sentences for murder and thought to have killed more, Cook was the leader of a paedophile ring suspected of murdering up to 20 young boys in the late 1970s and 1980s. Nicknamed Hissing Sid by colleagues, he has also been labelled as Britain's most notorious paedophile. Incredibly, Cook was paroled in 1998 and spent 9 months living in cells at Yeovil Police Station at his own request, after being smuggled out of prison by the authorities. Huge public outrage followed, and he was soon rearrested and charged with 18 further sex offences, which occurred between 1972 and 1981, being moved back to prison on remand. He has since been turned down for parole on 10 separate occasions, mainly due to his behaviour in prison and concerns about what may happen if he's ever released. Investigations into other murders possibly committed by Cook are actually ongoing. Number 30, Larry Hall. Spanning 4 states including Illinois, Indiana, Michigan and Ohio, Hall's many victims include sex workers, young girls and middle-aged women. Proved to have killed just 2 people, he has confessed to over 39 murders and is suspected of killing up to 50 people. Hall would often frequent historical reenactment sites and would select victims from nearby towns and cities. He was found guilty in June 1995 after a massive investigation by the FBI and local authorities across 4 states. He was caught after being shown a picture of one of the victims, to which he flinched, leading police to believe his involvement, which he later admitted. Hall is serving life without the possibility of parole in Federal Correctional Complex, North Carolina. He is one of the most prolific serial killers in American history. Number 29, Charles Cullen. If you thought Larry Hall was bad, then wait till you hear about former nurse Charles Cullen, whose murderous rampage claimed the lives of 29 people during a 26-year killing spree. Confessing to committing as many as 40 murders during interviews with police, psychiatrists and journalists, Cullen worked at several New Jersey medical centers until being arrested in 2003. Often administering lethal doses of intravenous medication to patients within his care, he was regularly treated for depression in 2 psychiatric facilities. He often used drugs such as digoxin and insulin in an attempt to draw less attention to the killings, and is said to have lived much of his life in a brain fog. Sentenced to 11 consecutive life sentences, he is not eligible for parole until June 10, 2403, and is currently held at New Jersey State Prison in Trenton. It is thought he may have murdered hundreds more patients at various hospitals, and investigations are ongoing. Number 28, Albert the Mad Hatter Anastasia. Italian-American mobster, hitman and crime boss Albert Anastasia is considered to be one of the founders of the modern American mafia. Co-founder and later boss of Murder Inc. organization, Anastasia controlled New York City's waterfront for most of his criminal career. Anastasia was nicknamed the Mad Hatter and the Lord High Executioner thanks to the thousands of murders committed by the organization. He received the death penalty in 1921 but was released in 1922 during retrial and later served 3 years imprisonment, escaping punishment for many of his crimes. Having other nicknames such as the Earthquake and the One-Man Army, his fame did not protect him forever, and he was eventually murdered by 2 gunmen in a barber's shop. Charges were never brought against the killers, however rival crime families were suspected to be involved. Number 27, Annie Walters. Better known as one part of the Finchley baby farmers, Walters is thought to have helped co-conspirator Amelia Sack murder as many as 12 children. Most of the killings took place in the late 1800s, and it's believed that another woman, Louise Massett, may have been mistakenly executed for one of their crimes. Walters and Sack ran a lying-in home in Stanley Road, London, and this is where many of the killings are thought to have taken place after the children were brought in for adoption. Caught after Walters raised the suspicion of her landlord in Islington, who was a police officer, they were convicted of murder at the Old Bailey and sentenced to death. They became the first women to be executed at Holloway Prison on the 3rd of February 1903 in a double hanging. Number 26, Henry Lee Lucas. After being convicted of killing 3 people, including his own mother, Lucas claims to have murdered over 600 other people. He rose to infamy while incarcerated for these crimes and later recanted the testimony, but it was at the time considered to be the most prolific serial killer in history. Convicted of murdering 11 people in total and condemned to death for a single case, he was imprisoned in the Ellis Unit, Huntsville, Texas, and died of congestive heart failure in 2001. DNA evidence has since verified that Lucas did not kill 20 of his supposed victims, and several books have been published on the Lucas case. Number 25, William Unek. Considered to be the Belgian Congo's most prolific serial killer in 1954, Unek killed over 21 people with an axe, taking little over an hour and a half to commit his crimes. He escaped to East Africa after the killings, but committed a second killing spree 3 years later, armed with a stolen police rifle. Within the next 12 hours, 36 more people had been killed, and these victims even included his own wife. A huge manhunt was performed, and Unek was eventually captured by a company of the King's African Rifles, with the hunt being one of Africa's biggest ever. The extensive search operation included dogs and aircraft, and Unek was fatally wounded during the capture and later succumbed to his wounds in hospital. One man, whom helped keep Unek's attention for over 2 hours, received the British Empire Medal for his part in the capture. In total, Unek murdered over 57 people in less than 14 hours. Number 24, Samuel Little. Nicknamed the Choke and Stroke Killer, American serial killer Samuel Little confessed to murdering 93 women between 1970 and 2005. Currently the second largest number of confirmed victims for any serial killer in the United States history, he was brought to justice with the help of the FBI's Violent Criminal Apprehension Program. Initially sentenced to 3 years in prison for breaking into a furniture store in Lorraine in 1961, he later spent time in prison for theft, assault, attempted rape, fraud, and attacks on government officials. Sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole at the California State Prison, Los Angeles County, Little continued to insist on his innocence. Confirmed to have killed around 60 people, he has claimed to have killed another 93 and is suspected of killing many more. He died in hospital with no cause of death ever released. However, he is known to have suffered from diabetes, heart problems and other health conditions. Number 23, Pedro Rodriguez Filho. Known by his infamous nickname Killer Lil Pedro, Filho was a Brazilian serial killer, spree killer and vigilante known for targeting criminals in revenge killings for the murder of his pregnant girlfriend. Officially sentenced for 71 murders but claiming to have killed over 100 drug dealers, rapists and murderers, he served over 34 years in prison. After his release, he started a YouTube channel providing information on modern crimes and later earned the name the South American Punisher when his crimes were revealed. He helped campaign against gang violence. However, he became a victim of this himself in March 2023 when two men shot him from a moving car, and as of yet, no suspects have ever been arrested. Number 22, Daniel Camargo Barbosa. Named as one of the most prolific serial killers in history, Barbosa, a Colombian serial killer, murdered at least 72 young girls in Colombia and Ecuador during the 1970s and 1980s. First arrested in Bogota in 1958 for petty theft, he was also later convicted of sexual assault in Colombia in 1964. Camargo escaped from the Gorgona prison in 1984, with authorities assuming that he had died at sea, and the press reported that he had been eaten by sharks. The sharks had not got him, however, and between 1984 and 1986, Camargo committed a series of at least 54 rapes and murders in Ecuador. Camargo slept on the streets, living off money selling to the public, and hid well, albeit in plain sight of the police. He was arrested in 1986, less than 5 minutes after committing another crime, and carrying both a copy of Crime and Punishment and parts of his victim. He was sentenced to 16 years, the maximum sentence at the time, and shared prison with another infamous serial killer, Pedro Alonso Lopez. More about him soon. Number 21, Javed Iqbal. One of Pakistan's worst serial killers, Iqbal confessed to the murders of 100 young boys ranging in ages from 6 to 16 years old. He often disposed of his victims, mostly runaways, in acid before dumping the remains in a local river. He was the subject of the largest manhunt in Pakistani history after leaving a note claiming to have committed suicide in the Ravi River, a claim that was false. He eventually turned himself in, claiming that the murders were in retaliation for his mother having to witness his decline over an arrest in the 1990s. He was condemned to die in the same way he had committed the murders. However, Pakistan's interior minister intervened and the sentence was changed to a hanging. He died before reaching the gallows, apparently murdered in his cell alongside Sajid Ahmed, an accomplice, with the killers now still at large. The deaths were officially ruled as suicides. Number 20, Patrick Kearney. Known as the Trash Bag Killer, this American serial killer and necrophile murdered a minimum of 21 boys and young men from 1962 to 1977 in Southern California. Claiming possibly as many as 43 victims according to law enforcement, Kearney is one of 3 men also referred to as the Freeway Killer. Kearney would often pick up and kill young male hitchhikers or young men from bars while on nights out. He was known to frequently purchase butcher's knives from a local shop and was described as a loner with an eerie sense of quiet about him. After fleeing to Texas when he was revealed as the killer, Kearney later turned himself in, thanks mainly in part to a plea from his own family. Kearney was charged with 21 counts of murder and, as agreed, pleaded guilty to all crimes he was accused of. Receiving 21 life sentences, he is still imprisoned at Mule Creek State Prison, California, and will never be released. Police believe Kearney is responsible for 7 other murders he has admitted to, but currently lack the physical evidence to charge him. Number 19, Manuel Octavio Bermudez. Colombian serial killer Bermudez killed at least 21 children in several towns of Valle del Cauca between 1999 and 2003 while working as an ice cream vendor. After luring his victims to cornfields with offers of money for picking corn, all would never return, having been disposed of by Bermudez. The mother of one of the 12-year-olds had reported him missing after seeing him with Bermudez, and he was arrested on July 18th, 2003. After finding newspaper clippings of the murders, syringes, lidocaine and a watch belonging to one of the victims in a motel room rented by Bermudez, he confessed to the murders. Sentenced to 25 years in prison on March 20, 2004, he is suspected of killing over 50 children and is still in prison somewhere in Colombia. Number 18, Ivan Keller. Nicknamed the Pillow Killer, Keller was active in France between the years of 1989 and 2006, while being responsible for the deaths of over 23 people. Having later confessed to killing around 150 people, he is suspected of being one of France's worst serial killers. Often targeting older victims, he used his job as a gardener to target their homes, stealing valuables that included money, paintings and jewels. He often attempted to make the death look as natural as possible in an attempt to hide his crimes. After his arrest warrant and confession, he committed suicide while standing trial at Mulhouse High Court using his own shoelaces. Number 17, Mariam Suliakiotis. Being as terrifying as she looks in the picture, Mariam Suliakiotis, a nun from East Africa, Greece, is thought to have murdered upwards of 177 people. She was found guilty of numerous counts of murder, fraud and other crimes committed over a period of 11 years. Details are sketchy, however the murders are thought to have taken place while Suliakiotis was offering the victims free tuberculosis treatments. Many nuns at the old abbey which she ran still protest her innocence and proclaim her a saint. However, she died in Averof prison on the 23rd of November 1954. Based on the overwhelming number of witness statements and the amount of evidence against her, modern historians reject the possibility of her innocence. Only one disagreement currently exists in Suliakiotis' case: the true number of her unfortunate victims. Number 16, Fernando Hernandez Levea. Convicted in 1986 of 33 counts of murder committed in 5 different states of the Mexican Union, this Mexican serial killer confessed to killing over 100 people. Motivated mainly by interest, he was an extremely organized, nomadic and hedonistic killer and one of the most prolific in the history of Mexico. Committing many of his crimes mainly for personal satisfaction, Pancho Lopez, as he has been called, had escaped from 2 other prisons. Along with 3 accomplices, 7 counts of robbery and kidnapping were also added to his rap sheet, for which he was sentenced to 60 years imprisonment. Attempting to commit suicide in his cell in 1999, his own weight caused the rope to break, denying him a quick death and causing him almost no harm. He is currently in the La Palma prison, and if he completes his sentence will be released in 2049, when he will be 84 years old. Currently it is thought he may have killed as many as 137 people. Number 15, Luis Garavito. Colombian serial killer, sex offender, pedophile and necrophile nicknamed the Beast, Garavito is responsible for the killings of 147 minors that included young boys and children. This total is thought to now be closer to the 200 mark, and Garavito was apprehended on the 22nd of April 1999. Garavito was sentenced to a total of 1,853 years and 9 days in jail, and in 2003 he confessed to the murders of a further 23 minors and 5 adults, bringing the presumed total victim count to 221. He is currently imprisoned at one of Colombia's most secure prisons, Valledupar in Cesar, and is held in solitary confinement for the fear that he will be killed by other inmates. Garavito's sentence is the longest ever handed down in the history of Colombia. However, he can only serve a maximum of 40 years, meaning he could be out on parole this year. Number 14, Mikhail Popkov. Nicknamed the Werewolf and the Angarsk Maniac, Popkov has been the subject of several TV documentaries over recent years. Popkov often targeted women who did things he considered immoral and lured his victims to their deaths while wearing a police uniform. Russian police spent months hunting the killer, whom at the time they had no identity for, and it took them over 2 decades to capture him, despite several survivors. Details of the killings are far too graphic to mention here. However, victims were often attacked with knives, axes, baseball bats and screwdrivers. DNA testings of 3,500 current and former policemen in 2012 finally brought Popkov to justice, and he was sentenced to life in prison for 22 murders and 2 attempted murders. Later admitting to an additional 59 killings, he is now thought to have killed 83 people in total, and is reportedly held at Russia's most brutal prison, the unescapable Black Dolphin. More on that prison in another video. Number 13, Gary Ridgway. Known as the Green River Killer, Ridgway was initially convicted of 84 separate murders, later adding another to his total, marking taking 49 victims. He is currently the second most prolific killer in the United States history according to the confirmed murders, and the most of his victims include teenage girls and adult women. Many of his victims were prostitutes and the others were mainly runaways in vulnerable circumstances, with most found in the Green River before his identity was known. Unfortunately for Ridgway, DNA profiling linked him to 4 murders, and he was arrested as he left the Kenworth truck factory where he worked in 2001. He was spared the death penalty and as part of a plea bargain was instead sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. He is currently locked up in Washington State Penitentiary, Walla Walla, and after a series of further confessions is suspected of killing over 90 people. Number 12. Wang Kuang. One of the most notorious murderers and rapists in Chinese history, Kuang grew up with an abusive alcoholic father whom denied Wang the chance to enter school thanks to his prolific gambling habits. Not much is published about the murders, and Wang's notoriety comes from mainly word of mouth. However, he is known to have committed his first murder on the 22nd of January 1995. After his arrest in 2002, he was found to have committed around 45 murders, was sentenced to death for the murders, and executed in November 2005. Number 11. Richard Cottingham. Nicknamed the New York Ripper, the Torso Killer, and the Times Square Killer, Cottingham mainly targeted prostitutes in the greater New York area. Earning the Ripper title mainly for the brutal method in which victims were discovered, Cottingham received 9 convictions and revealed a further 8 confessions under non-prosecution agreements. He was arrested several times during his killing spree for lesser crimes that included drunk driving, shoplifting, and robbery. His victims are thought to currently total 18 people, although many more are still being investigated. Number 10. Carl Eugene Watts. Known by his nickname Coral, Carl Eugene Watts earned the better nickname the Sunday Morning Slasher after murdering women and girls over an 8-year period. Although the number of his victims may have exceeded 100, Watts died of prostate cancer while serving only 2 sentences for life imprisonment for killing 2 people. If it is ever proven that he did indeed kill all of his victims, it would make him the most prolific serial killer ever in the United States. Number 9. Donald Henry Gaskins. Having a long history of criminal activities resulting in prison sentences for assault and burglary, P. Wee Gaskins is convicted of murdering at least 15 people. The jury convicting Gaskins only took 15 minutes to find him guilty. However, the original death sentence was thrown out and he immediately pled guilty at a second trial. Earning the title of the meanest man in America after brutally murdering fellow death row inmate Rudolph Tyner at Central Correctional Institution, he managed to get his hands on some C4 explosives. He received his second death sentence for this killing, and just before this was administered in September 1991, he confessed to killing another 95 people. He attempted suicide hours before he met his end in South Carolina's electric chair. Number 8. Jeffrey Dahmer. Subject of many documentaries and even a Netflix series more recently, Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer, better known as the Milwaukee Cannibal or the Milwaukee Monster. Known to have killed 17 men and boys between 1978 and 1991, Dahmer often factored cannibalism into many of the crimes. Diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, schizotypal personality disorder, and a psychotic disorder, he was found to be legally sane at his trial. He was sentenced to 15 terms of life imprisonment on February 17, 1992, and received another for a murder in Ohio in 1978. Dahmer was beaten to death by Christopher Scarver, a fellow inmate at the Columbia Correctional Institution in Portage, Wisconsin, and is thought to have had 17 victims in total. Number 7. Andrey Chiquitilo. Named the Butcher of Rostov, the Rostov Ripper, and the Red Ripper, Chikatilo was active in Soviet Russia, the Ukrainian SSR, and the Uzbek SSR between 1978 and 1990. Chiquito confessed to 56 murders and was tried for 53 of them in April 1992, when he was convicted and sentenced to death. Chiquito was executed by gunshot in February 1994, even though insufficient evidence existed to prove his guilt in 9 of those killings. Yet he is still one of the deadliest Russian serial killers to date. Number 6. H Holmes. Better known as Dr. Henry Howard Holmes, this American con artist and serial killer was the subject of more than 50 lawsuits in Chicago alone. Choosing a career of crime that included insurance fraud, swindling, check forging, bigamous illegal marriages, horse theft and murder, Holmes confessed to over 27 murders. Executed on the 7th of May 1896 for his many heinous crimes, his home became known as the Murder Castle, and several newspapers reported hidden rooms, secret torture chambers, trapdoors, gas chambers, and a basement crematorium. Most of this was false. However, one floor did house a factory furnace that may have been used to hide the evidence of his many crimes. Holmes was hanged in 1896 during a botched execution, asking for his coffin to be contained in cement and buried 10 feet deep to prevent grave robbing. Number 5. Pedro Lopez. One of Colombia's most prolific serial killers, Pedro Lopez was known as the Monster of the Andes, and is thought to have murdered a minimum of 110 victims, mostly young women and girls. Lopez travelled extensively throughout South America, while continuing his crime spree, claiming to have murdered hundreds of girls throughout Peru and Colombia. Lopez was sentenced to 16 years in prison, the maximum penalty for murder in Ecuador at the time, but was released in 1994. Currently a wanted fugitive in connection with a murder committed in 2002, his whereabouts are unknown, and he is now thought to have murdered roughly 300 people. Number 4. Harold Shipman. Considered to be the most prolific serial killer in British history and one of the most prolific in the history of the world, Dr. Harold Shipman was much loved by many of his patients in Hyde, Greater Manchester, UK. Nicknamed Dr. Death and the Angel of Death, he is currently the only British doctor to have been convicted of murdering his own patients. Shipman, whom had integrated himself as an upstanding member of the community, was in fact anything but upstanding. Later revealed to have possibly killed upwards of 250 elderly patients, Shipman was only charged with the murders of 15 women by lethal injections of diamorphine. Also convicted of forging wills of his victims, he was the subject of a whole life tariff, meaning he was set to die in a UK prison. Shipman's crimes went undetected in the British medical system for decades, and even at the end of 1996, when excess deaths in females aged over 65 years in his surgery were over 67, he was still not caught. Shipman hanged himself from the window bars of his cell in Wakefield Prison, nicknamed Monster Mansion, using his own bedsheets, with many of the victims' relatives saying they had felt cheated. Several British newspapers celebrated the death with front-page headlines, and Shipman has been the subject of numerous television programs. Number 3. Vasily Komarov. Convicted for the killing of 29 people in Moscow between 1921 and 1923, Komarov is thought to have been one of the earliest known serial killers in the Soviet Union. A horse trader who murdered at least 33 customers in the stable next to his home, Komarov always followed a single formula when committing his crimes. Firstly, he got to know a customer who wanted to buy a horse. Then, after bringing them to his home, he served them vodka and attacked them with a hammer. Most of his victims ended up either underneath his home or in the Moscow River, and he later confessed to over 33 murders. He was caught after police searching his home for illegal alcohol found a victim stuffed under a bale of hay in his stable. Describing murder as an awfully easy job, he attempted to commit suicide 3 times whilst in prison. Both Komarov and his wife Sophia, who also participated in the murders, were executed by firing squad in Moscow on June 18, 1923. Number 2. Pablo Escobar. One of the most ruthless killers in Colombian and world history, drug lord Pablo Escobar was accused of killing over 4,000 people, including numerous police officers and government officials. Many of the killings took place during the violent drug wars between various gangs in the country. However, several attacks mounted or paid for by Escobar himself stand out. The first was the downing of Avianca Flight 203, destroyed by a bomb over Bogota, killing all 107 people on board and 3 people on the ground. Escobar had personally ordered the bombing in an attempt to kill presidential candidate Cesar Gaviria Trujillo. The second attack, conducted on the Supreme Court of Colombia, saw the leftist M19 guerrilla group hold the Supreme Court hostage and was said to have been paid for by Escobar. The attack was down to attempting to rule out the extradition treaty with the United States, and over 44 civilians were killed in the attack. Several high-profile individuals were also killed on the orders of Escobar, including Justice Minister Rodrigo Lara and presidential candidate Luis Carlos Galan. Escobar met his end on a rooftop in Medellin while being chased by both the Colombian Search Bloc and the United States' Drug Enforcement Agency. Number 1. Ted Bundy. Known as the campus killer, Bundy kidnapped and killed numerous young women and girls during the 1970s, confessing to upwards of 30 murders committed in 7 states between 1974 and 1978. Bundy would become infamous in the serial killer world. His true victim total is unknown and likely significantly higher, and could easily be as high as 90 people. Facing 2 murder charges in Colorado, Bundy pulled off 2 miraculous escapes from prison and went on to commit further murders in Florida. He often broke into the homes of his victims at night and bludgeoned his victims as they slept. Often describing himself as the most cold-hearted son of a bitch you will ever meet, Bundy was described by his own defense team as pure evil. He committed 4 attacks in the space of 15 minutes during one night of chaos that saw 2 people killed and 2 survivors. After trial and conviction, Bundy was placed on death row again, attempting escape in 1984, this time unsuccessful. He later confessed to tens of murders, including several that were unknown to police at the time. Bundy was an unusually organized and calculating criminal who used his extensive knowledge of law enforcement methodologies to elude identification. Executed in the Rainford Electric Chair at 7:16 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on Tuesday, January 24, 1989, Ted Bundy, one of the world's most prolific and evil serial killers, died aged 42. Thanks for watching this video on the top 50 most dangerous. We'll see you in the next Vidello production. Thanks for watching. Think I missed anything at all? Subscribe with the bell icon to get notified about videos just like this one, and make sure you smash a like on the video if you enjoyed it and to help it reach other people in the YouTube algorithm. And of course, don't forget to check out the next video on this page.